Hello, I'm Tim Chapman. I'm speaking to you from Northern Ireland. I come from Belfast. I studied law at university, but I decided to work within the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland as a probation officer for about 20 years. And then I discovered restorative justice. I'm also the chair of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. And this is a membership network organization. Our aim is to work towards high quality restorative justice, accessible and available to anybody who wants to engage with it throughout Europe. Our activities are mainly raising the standards of quality practice through training and through research, influencing policymakers so that laws are passed and resources are given, and also attempting to educate and inform the public about what restorative justice is and the benefits of it to victims, perpetrators of crime, and to society in general.
Maybe you can talk about your experience in the field in Northern Ireland, so with restorative justice, your past and current experience, especially from a practitioner point of view.
Well, as I said, I worked as a probation officer in Northern Ireland for many years, and it was during a period of extreme conflict and violence within my country. And I worked in those areas where there was a lot of violence. And I think that made me realize that crime and violence affects not only the victims, but a community as a whole. It can be very undermining of community values and the quality of life that people can expect. And that led me towards restorative justice, which involves the people that are most affected by harm. Now, as part of the process of moving out of conflict into peace, the criminal justice system was given a fundamental review and reform. And one of the areas that was reformed was the youth justice system. The review recommended that our youth justice system should become a restorative justice system. And this was accepted by the government, and the government passed a law. And it was an unusual law, really, because a lot of European countries have laws about restorative justice or mediation, where judges are enabled and maybe encouraged to consider mediation or other restorative processes. But in Northern Ireland, the law actually said that the judge must, in every case that a young person admits their guilt of a criminal offence, the judge or prosecutor must offer the young person the opportunity to meet their victim. In other words, they had no choice. Yeah. And in most cases, the young person took up the opportunity to meet their victim. Mm. Now, when this law was passed, there weren't people trained to do restorative justice in our country. So I knew a little bit about restorative justice, and I became part of the Ulster University team that was commissioned to develop the practice model and to train people. And that's how I got really involved in restorative justice, and then later on became a researcher in this area. So we trained people for the youth justice system, and subsequently we trained community workers, youth workers, social workers, teachers, police officers, prison officers. It has to be said at first, judges and prosecutors were a little reluctant, because it was taking some discretion away from them that they had to refer. But I would say that over the last 20 years now, it has been a great success. We're a small country, 1.8 million. So I estimate about 1 in 20 people have participated in restorative justice in the formal system. And there has been no great complaints, resistance. Nobody is suggesting the law should be changed. It has become our norm. The results have been very encouraging. There's a very high satisfaction rate amongst victims, and for that matter, young perpetrators of harm feel that the system is fair and allows them to explain themselves and be accountable for what they've done. As a result of that sort of increased responsibility, our reoffending rates are positive. As I said, I was a probation officer, and we worked with offenders, and roughly 50% of the people who were put on probation reoffended. And the restorative justice and I worked with a much wider range of offenders, up to very serious offenders. And the reoffending rate is around 35%, 1 in 3, say. The other interesting outcome, which wasn't anticipated, is since the introduction of restorative justice, the amount of young people who are sent to custody, sentenced to some sort of detention, has reduced dramatically. And at any one time, we have maybe 5, 6, or 7 young people in custody, and they are for very serious offences, like serious sexual harm. I suspect this, and no research has been done, but it would be interesting for you to discuss this. I suspect the reason is that through restorative justice, prosecutors and judges are hearing the views of victims. And as anyone in the restorative justice field could tell you, when a victim has a good experience of restorative justice, they no longer feel punitive. They may enter the room feeling a sense of retribution, but actually through meeting the perpetrator, maybe hearing a very sincere expression of remorse and a responsibility to make amends or repair, most victims are very satisfied. And this is reported then to our prosecutors or judges. And I think then judges are less willing to send people into detention because they know the victim doesn't require it. So it's not perfect by any means, but it has been considered by government and the public as a success in that nobody is complaining about it.
So how do you think the restorative justice really addresses the needs of specifically the needs of victims, perpetrators, and the other parties involved in the criminal justice proceeding?
I'll tell you a few stories just from my research. I think from the perpetrator's point of view, it in many ways, restorative justice takes the crime more seriously than the courts. And I've worked in courts most of my life. The court looks at a crime in terms of, has the law been broken? And how serious is it? And what should the sanction be? Whereas the restorative process looks at the harm and suffering that a crime causes the victim, the community, and sometimes the perpetrator himself or herself suffers. And it examines that from a very human point of view. People tell their stories. People talk about the impact of crime on themselves, their families. They ask the perpetrator really difficult questions. I have seen perpetrators being held more accountable by a victim than I think any prosecutor or judge could do, because it's real experience. It's not just about, did you break this rule or not? It's about, do you realize how much you harmed my family? The victim can tell the person that they've hurt, how it impacted on them, their family. They can ask their questions. Are you going to do it again? Why did you pick on me? What were you thinking about? How do you feel about it now? Are you really sorry? If you are sorry, are you willing to do this to show you're sorry? Are you willing to change your life? All these things matter to victims, and they don't really get a chance to say these things in court. So it's very helpful. We also have members of the community present at a conference. So they get an opportunity to support the victim, to offer empathy and, believe the victim's story and validate it. But they also can, if they, observe the reaction of the perpetrator, offer support to the perpetrator to reintegrate and support the process of desistance for the perpetrator. So I think there's benefits, for all parties, including the general society. Of course, in Northern Ireland, restorative justice played a huge part in helping the society change from a culture of violence to a culture of reconciliation. And I think that's one of the reasons why it worked well in my country, because of our history.
What about, can you tell us what kind of impact can we see in restorative justice for what concerns especially the role of judges and public prosecutors that are particularly interested here?
Well, as I said, there was a natural resistance, which I understood from judges and prosecutors, because they were used to, exercising their discretion and professional judgment. And to a certain extent, the law restricted that a little. Now, I would say there's 80% at least support from the legal professions for restorative justice. And I think it does make you realize when you're working in the system that you don't hear the voice of the victim very often. The victims are more often seen as witnesses if there's a contest of guilt, rather than actually telling their story. So I think prosecutors suddenly realize, and judges, that this is an important voice to hear when making a decision on what to do about a case. But also, the perpetrator can speak more honestly about what they've done, because in most courts, the perpetrator is represented by an advocate or a lawyer. And of course, the lawyer will do his best to put across the defense in a way that will get a lighter sentence. That's their job. So you don't get the full reality of a crime through the process. It's mediated by the professionals.
Since we are addressing these professionals, why would you say then, let's say, that training is so important for judges and public prosecutors on restorative justice, and why would you say to them that they need to invest in restorative justice?
Well, I think what we in the restorative justice field share with prosecutors and judges is the wish that our citizens experience a good quality justice system. And I think we can work together to do that. I think training helps. It gives people time to consider, what restorative justice is, and particularly what it looks like in practice. I think that's very important. We in Northern Ireland used to invite judges to sit in when we were doing conferences, with the permission of all the participants. And once you experience the reality of restorative justice, you understand it better and you see its value and benefits. So training can in some way replicate that. It gives you time to reflect, ask your difficult questions, really test the theory of restorative justice, but more importantly, maybe through role play, simulations, see how it works in practice, and see the care that is taken to examine the reality of a crime on humans, the reality of the suffering that causes, but also the reality that the perpetrator might account for his reasons for committing a crime, the struggles that he is, dealing with in his life, the difficulties. I think what you'll find is that it really is a rigorous way of doing justice. The perpetrator is held really accountable for the harm they've caused, and victims get a voice. And usually the agreement that a victim and a perpetrator come up with is not only very relevant to the harm, but is usually carried out to the full and honoured. And so justice is seen to be done in a very direct way by ordinary citizens. To conclude, I think the relationship between, if you like, the informal system of restorative justice and the formal criminal justice system is very important to us. We need to find a way of working together so that we're supporting each other for the benefit of our citizens. For me, there's no greater value in modern society than the value of justice, pure and simple. And we all have a contribution to make that. not just the legal professions, but also ordinary citizens being more actively involved in the processes of justice. And I think that's the promise of restorative justice, and we need to work together to achieve that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Tim.